So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at another breakdown of a song. And the track I wanted to focus on today came out a few weeks ago. And it's a really interesting song because it's a collaboration between John Summit and Subfocus. Now I'm mainly going to be focusing on the second half of the song from the breakdown through to the drum and bass section at the end. Most of the sounds that you hear in this second half are used in the first house section though too. But I just wanted to do something a little bit different because I really like the end of this song. I think it has some good elements that we can talk about and learn from as well. And as usual, all of the sounds from this project will be in the description of the last video in the series. So make sure to like and subscribe and you'll be notified when that last video comes out. Anyway, to get us started, let's just have a listen to the recreation. And it's a relatively short drop at the end here. It's about 32 bars in length. You have the main drop, the last 16 bars, and then kind of the second half of that drop, which is kind of like a verse really. And you would think it would maybe lead then into another drop after this, but it actually just leads into the outro. And I've made everything from scratch apart from the vocals in here. So even including the drums, the sound effects, the bass, and some of the melodies, leads, pianos and things like that too. So as always, let's just start with some of the overall structure of the song, some of the very important points about how it's been arranged. Of course, one of the biggest things about this song is the tempo change. And tempo changes aren't very common in a lot of dance music genres. And one of the reasons being is because it can be a little bit of a problem for DJs to mix this song very well into their sets. This song in particular starts out with a tempo of 136 beats per minute for the house section at the beginning. And then when we get all the way through to the drum and bass section at the end, it goes all the way up to 174 beats per minute. And it creates a really, really cool, interesting build and lift in energy. I can't imagine this would be played a lot in DJ sets unless you were using it as a transitional song. In that case, it becomes very useful actually, because you don't have to kind of do any blend or like faked edits. And if we were to look at the automation in the tempo, I didn't get this exactly right because the tempo actually starts to lift a little bit earlier than maybe you would expect. If we look into bar 25 here at this section, this is kind of the second half of our breakdown, the build up leading into the proper build up into the drum and bass section. It has this really interesting feature to this because usually you'd expect some kind of tempo change to just start at, say, the new section that comes in. But what they've done here, and again, I've not got this exactly right as I'll show you in a minute, but the tempo change seems to start about halfway in this big 16 bar section here. So by the time you get to the actual build up to the drum and bass section, you can already hear just a very slight increase in tempo, which gives it this sense of something big is about to change. I'll just play that again. Rising there. And then that of course builds up to that that final tempo there of 174 beats per minute. And the tempo doesn't come back down at the end of the song either, which again is slightly weird. I've not used a lot of record box either, but I can imagine this isn't great for that too. And overall, the structure of the song is quite a pop-like structure, so to say. It's a very radio-focused song structure where we have big sections of 16 bars and 8 bars. We have kind of your classic pop sections like a breakdown, verse, a build-up or a pre-chorus, and then of course the chorus itself. It's designed to be played, of course, in a club, but it's also designed to work very well on the radio where you've got a very short space of time and you need vocals to keep the listener interested. So let's talk about the key of the song then. And to talk about the key, I'm going to go and look at our pianos. And the key of the track is another one similar to the Fred Again song 10. It could be seen as G minor, which it most likely has been written in, but we start on a different note than the root note of our key, the G. You can see this first chord here starts on the E flat, and you can see this is 1-2 steps below in terms of our scale, our root note there of G. And if you remember from the other video, that means it is in a Lydian key, just starting at that note 2 steps below. And this would be E flat Lydian, which is very similar to E flat major, but it just has a sharpened fourth. And that sharpened fourth is this A here. We're going to probably talk about this in terms of G minor, but it's just good to understand how these modes work. If we listen to this chord sequence, and we look at what chords are using this A, there's one over here in this 5th chord, the top note, and this middle note down here below. So just to show you an example of how modes work, if we were going to change this from E flat Lydian to E flat major, we would just simply move these notes down a step. And this is what E flat major would have sounded like with that same chord pattern. And obviously, as you can hear, it sounds terrible. If we were to look at the arpeggiated synth up here too, and you'll see within this arpeggiated scale that this A down here isn't being played. And the only A, that sharpened 4th note that we have in our sequence, is this one here. Again, shift this down. Sounds terrible. And I don't think the track again was written in E flat Lydian, it was written in G minor, but all he did is just shifted down those 2 steps. It's a very, very nice way to create a new interesting chord sequence within a minor scale. And within the track, of course, we've got a main drum beat, we've got a bass, we've got quite a few different layers of melodic instruments like chords and leads in this song. As we said, we've already got this arpeggiated synth. We've got this main piano here. We've also got a pad layer that's added into that piano too. And they're both in this piano group here, as you can see. We've got a few strings. The strings are a little bit harder to tell exactly what was going on with them, so to be honest, I ended up just leaving them as the chords that were set above. We do have a very high-pitched string, one note that just plays throughout some of the bigger sequences to give that tension and build up the energy in the track. But the main lead sound that we actually have in the song is this trumpet, apart from the vocals, of course. And that sounds like this. And it is quite a simple melody. It just focuses around this stretched chord idea that I've talked about in some previous videos too. And all that the pattern does is it jumps between the first note of whatever chord is being played, or the bass note, and the 3rd note, but an octave above where it would usually be within a standard triad chord. This is our root note of our chord here, the E flat. The 3rd note would generally be here on the G, but we've just shifted it up by an octave, and it creates that really epic anthemic feel to your leads. And all of those different notes follow that same pattern, apart from the odd one here, like the F that doesn't have that second note in there. It's used more of a passing note really. G here, the third note would be the B flat, which you can see it is, but again, just the octave above. There is one chord that does differ from this though, and it's the second to last chord over here, the one that lands on the C. And what this is, you can see the root note is the C, and the note above is a D. And that's actually a major second interval instead of that third interval within the chord. I think the reason why this is because if we move this second interval up to the third, it lands back on the root note, the E flat that we were talking about before, the Lydian. Doesn't necessarily sound bad. I do think having it on that third note along with all the other notes before it makes the sequence maybe sound a little bit too happy. There's too much stability within that chord sequence, so having it shifted down to the second note creates a bit more of a lift between that second to last chord and the last chord, so helping to build up some tension before we release that back at the beginning. And the whole sequence itself, of course, is split into these 4-bar sections, with the first 2 bars being the same in each 4-bar section, and then the second half is the big difference. And this is a great trick for writing any repetitive melody, is just changing up the second half of a 4-bar sequence, and it's going to give your melody a little bit more longevity instead of just repeating the exact same thing over and over again. And the really interesting thing about this melody is that we're pretty much using all of the chords. We've got that E flat, F, G, B flat, the C and the D at the bottom there, which makes up 6 out of the 7 chords, and the only one that we miss is the A chord. And the reason why this chord is missed out is because when you're in a minor key like this, the note above your root note of your minor key in the scale will be the diminished chord. They just don't sound too great, and so that's why that chord has been missed out. These last 2 chords also lead back into the E flat at the beginning, going C, D, E flat. And if we were to look at the bass, play this alongside, the bass and the trumpet are just following each other, with the bass just playing that lower note of the 2 and the trumpet accentuating with the third note above. The only difference in the sequence is when the bass moves to the C in that second half of the 8 bars, it has to jump up to the octave above. Could be a few reasons why they've done this. One reason that I think happens quite a lot is that when that C goes down to the octave below where it normally should be, it might be a little bit too low. Starting to go into that territory where we get near to like 30 hertz in the low end of our bass, and the bass sounds too low. But also it does provide this nice lift at this point too. And just a little trick to point out here within our bass, you can see I have my bass group here at the top, and inside that I have 2 layers. I have a sub and this kind of top brighter wide layer that we'll talk about later on. And I could have used an instrument rack inside of Ableton to do this same process, but what I've got here is 2 separate tracks, and all I've done on the wide track is I've set the input of the track to be the sub track above. So you can see I've selected sub, make sure it's on post effects as well if you've got any MIDI effects too. And then I've pressed in on the MIDI track. And all that will do is it'll ignore the MIDI that you've got in that track itself, and it will just receive MIDI from the track you selected. So now when I change the pattern within my sub part at the top here, it's also going to send that MIDI to my wide part underneath. It's going to save you a lot of time, especially if you don't know how to use instrument racks or you find them a little bit confusing. This is another way that you can use this, and you can keep adding, of course, more and more tracks in, just making sure to select the input from the track above.